With Catherynne M. Valente. I will read your bio if that sounds good to you. Okay. Oh, I am Jessie Quack, by the way. So Catherynne M. Valente is the New York Times bestselling author of over 24 works of fiction and poetry, including Palimpsest, the Orphan's Tale series, Deathless, Radiance, and the crowd-funded phenomenon, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. She is the winner of the Andre Norton, Tiptree, Mythopoeic, Riesling, Lambda, Locus, and Hugo Awards, and has been a finalist for the Nebula and World Fantasy Awards. She lives on an island off the coast of Maine with her partner, 2 dogs, 2 enormous cats, 4 chickens, several spinning wheels with ulterior motives, an uncompleted master's degree, and a secret door in the back of her wardrobe.
That is an old one. There's no partner anymore.
Oh.
Book 49 came out last year, and there's a child now. I gotta update my website. The thing is that when you have a child, updating your website suddenly drops very far down the list.
How many chickens are there still?
None, actually. So I did have chickens.
And can you talk into the mic for the, yeah.
Yeah, so I did have chickens. I had a lot of chickens. I had 3 rounds of 6 chickens, but I do live on an island in Maine, and I don't know who did this because the only fauna we have on the island either walked there when the bay used to freeze over or someone brought it. So I don't know who brought minks, but there's minks on the island. We don't have squirrels, but we have minks, and the minks killed many of my chickens. We were left with 3 left, one of which had lost her eye defending the other one, so we renamed her to Chick Fury.
Nice.
And ultimately ended up giving them to, when they stopped laying, we gave them to a family that just wanted pet chickens. So there's no chickens at the moment, but I do, with the price of eggs, there's probably gonna be chickens again soon.
Fair. Well, I wanted to start with an easy question, which is that on X the other day, you posted that your 6-year-old asked you, in your whole life, how many objects have you gotten that were cursed? And I am also dying to know.
Well, I did kind of mumble under my breath, a couple of wedding rings for sure. But I loved that question so much because it was so serious and just so, it's like that joke about quicksand, that like things you think are going to be real factors in your adult life from children's cartoons, like cursed objects and quicksand, just they don't figure in as much as an adult. But I also realized about a day later it could have been a roast. Like, Mom, your situation is clearly cursed. Like, how many do you have? But yeah, I think the wedding rings is probably the answer, to be honest.
Excellent. Thank you. I saw that and I was just like, oh my gosh, what? All right, so you have written in so many different genres, and you've got fantasy, myth, superhero, horror, middle grade, sci-fi. Am I missing anything there?
Probably. I also have ADHD, which is why I have all of those. It really nearly kills me to do the same thing twice. So I'm always looking, not just for variety, but for challenge. I genuinely am looking for the thing that nobody thinks I can do. That's the thing I want to do next. I started doing that media tie-in work that I've done, and we'll probably get to it at some point, with Mass Effect and Batman and Star Wars and all of those, just to prove that I could do a pew-pew in space. It didn't always have to be poetry. I am capable of that. And I'm always looking for that, just to do something that feels like an uphill climb to myself. Life would probably be easier if I didn't do that, but that's how I'm built one way or another.
Do you find that there's any kind of common threads that go through the books, no matter where they're set or what the genre?
Well, language, of course. I care so much about language. I started out as a poet. The way things sound and the exact right word, even if it's a ridiculous word that no one uses anymore. I learned one the other day, and I posted that as well. I thought it was so fantastic. There is an English word. It has fallen out of use, but it's stericide, and it means when an icicle falls from the roof into the snow. Like, those specificity of words, like, to me, that's a huge part of the joy of language. And when I started out, I mentioned this at the opening ceremonies, but when I started out writing, I had this notion that every word in a novel could matter the way every word in a poem matters. Now, that was a long time ago, and I've grown up, and it's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting for the reader, not just the writer. And I've sort of learned to balance that, but it still matters so much to me what every word performs in a story. But then, apparently, it was brought to my attention by S.J. Tucker, who's a singer-songwriter who's I've often traveled with. In fact, the last time I was at Norwescon, I was here with her. She's like, you can't stop with the birds. There's birds everywhere. And it really is true. I can't quit birds. There's birds in every single thing I do. And every time I sit down to write a new thing, I'm like, but a bird goes there. That's where a bird goes. And so I still keep doing the bird thing. I think I also, just mythology and folklore, one way or another, it always ends up in there, even if I'm doing hard sci-fi. Because even in the scientific world, we create our own little myths. Where I went to college at UC San Diego. It's a very STEM university, and there's a drinking fountain in the middle of the campus. And even at orientation, I was told that at finals time, you're supposed to drink from the drinking fountain facing your disciplinary part of campus, like, for good luck. That's folklore, that's mythology. Like, I'm not sure that any of those people genuinely thought that was true, but they weren't willing to not do it. And that kind of constant creativity of the human imagination, constantly trying to find, even in the most scientific environments, a way to magic their way out of it. I deeply, deeply love, and it matters to me. And I think probably underworlds are another one. There's always got to be an underworld, and see, here's a fancy specific word, katabasis, which is a journey and return from the underworld.
Are there any like lesser known folklores, like what you just mentioned about the drinking fountain, anything like that you've been wanting to explore but haven't written about yet?
So I'm actually working on a book right now called Nobody But Us, and despite the fact that it is a near future thriller and it is in many ways not fantasy, while I was doing the research for where it's set, which is in the Dolomite Range, the extreme north of Italy, of the Italian Alps, I came across a myth cycle I had never heard of before. I had never heard, not even a whisper of it. Not one word of it sounded familiar. It's called the Fanes Saga, F-A-N-E-S. It is from a group of people called the Ladins, not Latins, but Ladins. They are an indigenous pre-Roman tribe living in this area of the Alps. And the whole thing is just so wildly cool and different. We don't have all of it because this is so long ago, and before the Roman Empire, they weren't keeping a lot of records, these guys. But it would appear that the Ladins were allied with the marmots, the animals, and had a long and fruitful relationship with the marmots. The king had two daughters, twins. Dolicilla is the one twin's name. The other one gets traded away to the marmots, so her name kind of comes and goes. There's about 5 different versions of it, but Dolicilla will be important in a second. And then her father decided allying with the eagles would be better than marmots, and the marmots took their revenge. And there's huge war starts, and Dolicilla is the greatest warrior who's ever lived, this female warrior in this pre-Roman tribe. She has arrows that never miss. She has silver armor that tarnishes when a battle is coming so that they can prepare. And she has the Raita, which is this massive jewel that she wears on her helm into battle and lights the darkness. That's very Silmaril. But my favorite is that there's a sorcerer. The sorcerer's name is Spina de Mol. That's because he takes the form of a rotting donkey carcass. Cool guy. And he has an apprentice named Eye of Night, and Dolicilla and Eye of Night fall in love. I'm not going to tell you the whole story here, but you can see like how cool this actually is. And where this all ends up, and it was so perfect for the story that I'm writing, is that this is one of the stories of a people that are sleeping under the hills and will one day return. That they went through a door that now is not, and one day they will return. So I'm so excited to finish my research on it. You don't even want to know how expensive the academic books that cover this totally obscure thing are. Oh my God. But I'm almost done with the research just on that thing. And I was halfway through the book when I found this. And it's so wonderful to find stories that just that's not even like, oh, it's an obscure culture. Like, no one knows about this. I've not talked to any folklorist friend of mine who's heard of it. It is very, very unknown. And that's just thrilling. It's thrilling to find something like that. We know so little about the Latin culture, but what we know is fascinating to me. So I am always on the lookout for things like that. But because I also write short stories, and quite a few of them, if I come across one, it goes in pretty quick. If I come across something that I love and that it doesn't feel offensive for me to be the one telling the story, the turnaround time is pretty fast.
Can you talk a bit more about your research process and how you go about finding these amazing little nuggets and collecting more information on them?
Yeah, sure. So I love research. I intended to be a professor of classics, and so academic research feels very comfortable and home-like to me. In some ways, the research phase is my favorite part of writing a book. I think it was Truman Capote that talked about, like, his heart hurt when he thought about how good his book could be, because you haven't fucked it up yet. It's all just still in your head, and it can be perfect in your head. So I start out. Honestly, once I have the idea and I'm ready to sort of start the process, I start out naming everyone. And that actually begins the research process, because all of my names mean something. Really hated the name I was born with, so names mean a lot to me, and everyone has to have the perfect, correct one. So they all mean something, whether it's in another language. In space opera, all of the names of planets, aliens, everybody are words in the languages of Eurovision participating countries. There's always some kind of schema involved in the names. And so depending on what the story is, looking for names will prick up things that will become the research paths. So this particular, I don't want to get into what the book is about, because I'm in the middle of writing a book is the worst time to ask a writer what their book is about. Yes. Because all I can think of is, the little filigree on the side of the ship. No one wants to hear it. But this is, in many ways, the most modern book I've ever written. But because I'd set it in the Dolomites, and though I've been to Italy, I've never been there. And due to when I started writing this during COVID, I was like, well, we're gonna have to get really good at research for this one. And so I was intensively researching the Dolomites, and not just this geography there and the sort of history of it, and all of the sort of tourist controversies and things like that. I came across this thing. It's the light in the Dolomites. It's called the Enrosadira. The rosy, this pink light that happens around 4 or 5 p.m. It's like magic light for Hollywood, but literally the mountains turn pink. And the reason I wanted to set it in the Dolomites is that place looks like an alien landscape. It looks like another planet. It's absolutely like bare and austere, and then it just gets washed in pink. And then as soon as I heard that, I was like, there's going to be a fairy tale about that, like, for sure. There's no way that there's not stories about what this is. So I went looking for that, and in looking for that is how I found the Fane saga. And I found there are other fairy tales not related to that saga from that region, and my favorite one is The Man Who Wanted to Reach the Moon. And it was the idea that you could walk up those mountains and get to the moon. And so even the people living there were like, yeah, this looks like what the moon must look like, because it really does. So I kind of follow, I don't know, I follow breadcrumbs that were not laid for me, but they're there. And that sort of hunting through, bird-like, if you will, for the shiny bits is just such a joy of writing to me. And I have a really amazing research library at home that I've assembled over the years from that uncompleted master's degree. You need to borrow a medieval academic text, I can probably hook you up. And between my own books, for each novel that I have written, I have more and more research materials, and I'm very lucky that my small island in Maine has a library branch that connects to the whole state. So it's just like the towers and cairns of books keep rising on my floor, and then by the time I'm buried, the book is done.
Perfect. I would love to hear a little bit more about how your travels have influenced your writing, because that's very clear in your books. Just they have this very expansive armchair travel sort of feel to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been so fortunate to travel as much as I have in my life. And some of that was on my own. In another incarnation, I was a Navy wife. I lived in Japan for a number of years. I went to university in Scotland as well. And I was able to travel around a lot. And then, I mean, the blessing of it sometimes like makes me tear up. This life that science fiction and fantasy can be and has given me has allowed me to see the world in a way I could never have done on my own. I could never have done it. And it's been so precious to be able to see so many different places. And when I'm in a new place, I genuinely feel like I have vestigial antennae that are suddenly out and spinning around and like receiving new data. I went to Denmark for the first time last year, which was wonderful because it was new, but also because part of my family comes from Denmark. I learned that I have no idea how to pronounce anything in Danish. Tried to tell people like what town my family was from, and they're like, what? But this is a great example of how it affects it. So once this Italian novel is done, the next thing on my plate is a noir retelling of The Little Mermaid. And I had intended to set it in Seattle, actually, because I'm from here, rains all the time, seemed like a good place to put it. And I saved starting on it till I got to Copenhagen, because I felt like that would be a lovely way to honor Hans Christian Andersen by starting it there. And I was talking to some of the other Danish authors at this convention, and they said, oh, where are you going to set it? And I said, Seattle. And they seemed like genuinely hurt that it wasn't going to be set in Denmark. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I mean, I'm Danish, but I'm not Danish. That feels weird and not cool. And then in the back of my head, I was like, I don't want to do any more research. I'm researching so much. Like, if I do it in Seattle, I don't have to research anything. But they're like, but you know, it should be here. And the minute I started thinking about it, because I'd always intended to set it right after the Second World War, it was beyond perfect. It was absolutely beyond perfect. I went to the Museum of the Danish Resistance. I gave myself one day in Copenhagen to see if it would work. Mm-hmm. And the minute I stepped into that museum and found out that during the blackouts, they painted the streets white so that people wouldn't fall over. And they had them there. They had these canes. I don't know the technology for that era. They had little lights on the end of the cane, like a little glowing, like an LED light, but it couldn't possibly have been an LED light. So this is a city in black and white for a noir retelling, a city that made itself black and white. And then I reread The Little Mermaid. I forgot how that ends, and I think we all did because of Disney. Because Disney changed the ending, we all remembered that she died. I made friends with S.J. Tucker because I made a joke about dead mermaids. She doesn't die at all. She doesn't die at all. She has to do good deeds for man for 300 years, and she will be given a soul. She becomes one of the daughters of the air. Well, that sounds like a detective in a dusty back room doing good deeds for man to me. And it occurred to me that the original Little Mermaid would still be serving out her 300 years in World War II. And see, like when it's right, things just kind of open up like dominoes. It's amazing. And in fact, Luftensdottir, which is daughter of the air, is a perfectly legitimate Danish surname. So I did a bunch of research, and I made friends with some bartenders at this bar, and they took me around like after hours to like all the servers' hangouts in Copenhagen, and I sat there with this beautiful ginger young gay man going over the Danish so that all of my place names and species names and everything would be the right Danish, and it was just so correct and wonderful. Mm-hmm. And had I not been invited to a convention in Denmark, and had I not gone, this book wouldn't exist. It simply wouldn't. And that's how travel affects my work.
I love that. Actually, right after this, I'm going to go spend a couple days in Roslyn because I'm hoping to set a book there. So it's very much a like, will this city work for me or
Yeah,
this little
yeah.
town? So I'm going to be doing the same thing, like going into little bars and talking to people. So
It's
I love
it's so
that.
wonderful.
Bringing it back home because you are from here. How does the Pacific Northwest affect your work?
Oh, it's funny because I live in Maine now, and New Englanders are very proud of New England. It's it's a lot. I get a lot of like, oh, our beautiful mountainous region. I'm like, I mean, okay, like they're cute, but I think that one of the bigger ways is those mountains. Like in my mind, there's always mountains, always. It took me so long to not feel unsafe with a flat horizon. Like people could get here. We are not safe. And so yeah, in my mind, there's always mountains. But sort of mythologically, folklorically, my parents were divorced when I was very young. My mother moved to California, and for quite some time, I spent the school year up here with my dad and our family in cold, dark Seattle. And then in the summer, I would go to hot, golden California. So when I was a kid, I kind of thought Persephone was like a documentary about me and my life. Like, I saw myself in so many of those stories because I was going back and forth from this place. And it is kind of reversed from Persephone because the place that I am from was Seattle, and I hated California. I still hate California. It's not its fault. It is. I lived in California for way too long without liking it, and so if you didn't like it the first time, like 10 years later, you hate that place. There are parts of it that are so beautiful, it really is, but I hate the heat, and I can't handle it at all. I am allergic to virtually everything down there, especially violently, nearly fatally allergic to eucalyptus. They're real into eucalyptus in California. Yeah. So like, the Hades was my home. like I had come from there as this reverse Persephone journey. And I don't know, man, Seattle just, it is my home. As much as Maine is my adopted home and my chosen home, and I do deeply, deeply love it there in Maine. I had a party at my house last year, and somebody who was new to the island asked where I was from. I said, oh, I'm from Seattle, because you're not ever allowed to say you're from Maine unless your family has a plot in a graveyard in Maine. Like, even my son will never be allowed to say he's a Mainer. It's not a thing. The phrase is, if a cat had cookies in the oven, or if a cat had kittens in the oven, you wouldn't call them biscuits. Well, I mean, that just means you guys didn't leave the town you grew up in, and I chose this place, and it's a hard place. But that person said, oh, you're a long way from home, and one of the old timers on the island said, no, she is home. And it was very sweet, but in the back of my head, I was like, not really. Like, I mean, like I do love it here, but there is a part of my heart that is always those mountains and those trees. I took a picture of Mount Rainier and sent it to a friend back home, and it said, look, my old friend came to visit. So in some ways, this just will always be my home, even if I never live here again.
I want to shift the focus a little bit and talk about some of your books. And some of them have some really unique origin stories. Like, for example, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland started as am I correct, a book that a character mentioned reading in palimpsest?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And then you crowdfunded it.
Yeah,
right? Okay.
I did. So it's funny that my two most successful books have the weirdest origin stories, and the second one is the dumbest origin story. Yeah, so Palimpsest is a very adult book. If you haven't read it, I don't know who has or hasn't. Adult with a capital A and 3 X's. It is about a sexually transmitted city. It's like Narnia, but you can't get there unless you've slept with someone who's been there. And so one of the main characters is named November in that. And her favorite book from when she was a little girl is this totally invented thing. It's a book within a book. It's a thing that postmodern people do. called The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making. It was never real. It was meant to sort of illustrate her relationship with her father, who was a librarian. But because he's a librarian, I gave it a Dewey Decimal number. And like it's printed in the book like a card from a card catalog. And the first paragraph, which is intact to the real book, is in palimpsest. And also a sex scene with the green wind, which I guess I just don't talk about now because I hope that kids will grow up before they read that other book. But it's a bit weird how all of this went backwards. But so Palimpsest came out in February 2009, and you may remember that like all the money was on fire then. And Bantam Spectra had ceased to exist 6 weeks before the book came out. My editor called me and started to tell me and started crying and said, I thought I was ready to make these calls, but I guess I'm not. And you may or may not know that 6 weeks is your publicity window. That's when everything happened, like that's when the company pays attention to your book. So we knew we were fucked. And while the first Orphan's Tales book had done very well, the second one hadn't done so well. So we kind of thought, this is a three-strike situation, that if we can't make this book sell, I'm going back to graduate school. And S.J. Tucker, who I've mentioned a few times, I had become very good friends with. She'd done an album based on each of the Orphan's Tales books and had done one based on Palimpsest too. So we all got in a big truck, and for 4 months we toured the whole country selling copies out of the back of the truck. We were in, I actually never counted, 28 cities? I don't even actually know. Anywhere that would take us. And we did reading concerts where I would read and she would sing. We would pick up performers everywhere we went through LiveJournal. LiveJournal, you know, the old good internet. And so every show was different. We took 40 fans on a train from Chicago to New Orleans, had a masked ball in New Orleans, and we were all broke too. We had no money to do any of this. This was by the skin of our teeth, absolutely. SJ was at the time living on the road and touring 24/7. But everywhere we went, people would ask where they could get that Fairyland book, because I put a fucking Dewey Decimal number on it. And that one of the other things we'd done is we were doing an ARG, an alternate reality game based on the book. And so I had made an Amazon page for it too. Now you couldn't actually order it. You got, if you know, it was out of stock, and if you messaged one of the used book sellers, that got you further in the game. But I made a cover for the Amazon page. So like people thought this was real. I was like, it's not real. It's just postmodernism, it's fine. But when I got home from that tour, and by the way, it was my first Hugo nomination, and that little book has made everything else in my life happen. We did the whole, we're gonna save the city by putting on a show, and it worked. But when I got home, my husband had been laid off from 2 jobs within like 2 weeks from each other, and we had just moved to Maine. Like I spent all my savings to move us to Maine, and we didn't have money for groceries. It was really grim. And again, it was I know an old barn, let's put on a show. I was like, well, everyone wants to read Fairyland, so I'll write Fairyland. I will post a chapter every week. I will put it on the internet. I will put a donation button on there, because I wasn't comfortable, like, it wasn't really paywalls at the time. Kindle had just started. Like, crowdfunding was a thing, but it was very early and new. So the donation button just said, donate whatever you think the book is worth, and if you can't donate anything, please just enjoy it. And it took off. It was absolutely crazy. Within about 36 hours, and Cory Doctorow was posting about it, and you know, it's awkward to say the name now and attribute anything to him, but Neil Gaiman was posting about it, and it saved us. It absolutely saved us. And I wrote, so I was always staying just a little bit ahead of the posting schedule, but I went to a convention about 4 or 5 weeks in, and I was doing a Q&A like this, and someone raised their hand and said, you can't go back and change anything. Do you realize that? Like, it's already up there. Like, I downloaded it. Like, you can't change, you can't fix anything. And I went, oh, no. It had literally not occurred to me that I couldn't do that. I was like, oh, I didn't think of that. But I was like, well, comic book writers have been doing it forever. I'll make it work. And it sold to Feiwel and Friends, and it debuted at #8 on the New York Times list. And for the next 2.5 years, I was touring almost all the time, all over the world. It really, I mean, it was a magical thing, and the people I have met and the things that have happened because of those books. And now I can look at this beautiful rainbow 5-book series, and that thing that was never real, actual children have grown up with it, have come to my house. It happens because you're on a small island, so I get a text from somebody that's like, there's triplets here that want to meet you. Is it okay if I say where you live? And like, so all summer long, children will randomly show up at my house who have grown up with this book and loved this book the way November did in Palimpsest. And it is like the circle of life. It is the genuine magic of literature.
That must feel so surreal.
It's completely surreal.
So the other book that has the unique origin story that I am thinking of,
Yeah.
space opera.
So during this whole touring period with Fairyland, I went to London, and I got an email from a woman I did not know. Her name is Molly Hahn, and she said, "You do not know me, but everyone you know knows me. I am the agent of many people you know. And if you would like, while you're staying in London, I live in Kew Gardens. That is a very far suburb of London. And you can stay with us, which is much nicer than a hotel. The only requirement would be we are having a Eurovision party, and attendance is mandatory." And I said, sounds great. I don't know what Eurovision is, but I'm sure it's fine. Famous last words. So this was 2012, by the way. I sit up a little higher when I talk about Eurovision because I get so excited. 2012 is still one of the best years Eurovision ever had. I was real lucky that was the year, and 2013 was terrible, so it was a kismet. But I went, and the bizarre things that happened in life. One of the other guests was Jane Seymour's sister. You know who Jane Seymour is? She was in Somewhere in Time, a movie I'm obsessed with and have been my whole life, and thought she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Her sister looks exactly like her. So I kept looking over and being like, it was so strange. And the other one was like somebody who's one of those secret songwriters that has written a bunch of pop songs but you've never heard their name. So he was like explaining key changes and everything as we were watching it. And I just loved it. I loved it. I was so over the moon about it. And we can talk about why later if you like. But fast forward, so I started live tweeting it every year. And so this was May 2016. This will be important in a minute, exactly when in 2016 this was. So May 2016, I was live tweeting it, and a fan named Charles Tan, who lives in the Philippines, replied to me and said, "Oh my God, you should totally write a Eurovision fantasy or science fiction book." And I typed back like, "Oh, that'd be super cool." And 5 minutes later, Nava Wolf at Simon & Schuster DM'd me and said, "I will buy that book right now." And my agent still calls it the fastest deal in publishing. And the contract still, I saved the front page of it, says Eurovision in space, because there was no title. There was nothing. I just knew it. I didn't think fantasy was right. I was like, it has to be a bard story then. And I don't know. I don't feel, because like all the pyrotechnics and stuff, it didn't feel right. Space felt right. And at my then partner, as I was signing the contract, was like, "Do you have any ideas?" I was like, "Not one, nothing. I have no clue." And it was supposed to be a novella as well. In retrospect, that was insane. But he was like, "Do you even know what, like the protagonist?" I was like, "Nope, no idea. I'll figure it out." And I did. But the whole thing happened because I live tweeted Eurovision, and a fan cared. Like, that's why that book happened. And it was one of the magical things that used to be able to happen on Twitter, where when we all are following each other, like someone could be like, "No, I'll do that now," because Nava is also a huge fan of Eurovision. And then as I was writing it, and it was very hard to write, what I was talking about earlier about what each word performs in a story, I've written comedic scenes in serious novels many times. Deathless, which is a Russian fairy tale set during the siege of Leningrad, a laugh riot. It is one of the most depressing things I've ever written. It's also one of the funniest because the Russian sense of humor is top-notch, very grim, top-notch. But I'd never written anything that had like a top-shelf genre of comedy. And so suddenly, when choosing a word, Not only did it have to pull the weight of being the right word, a word that sounded good, a word that maybe, you know, had some foreshadowing in it, but like it had to be the funniest word too. It led to a lot of conversations about like, what's the funniest fruit? Or like, is Willy or Wang funnier? And like, it was a lot. It was incredibly stressful, and my editor got a book out of me in 5 weeks. She was mean to me, and I keep trying to tell editors, like, if you are mean to me, you get the book. The meanest gets the book. Stop telling me to not worry about my deadlines. You will never get anything. So I turned it into her, and I really felt that I had written 3/4 of a good book and had been rushed on the ending because she was rushing me. And it was supposed to be a novella, and it was 70,000 words. But like, in retrospect, to have enough aliens to represent like the countries in Europe, that is 40,000 words. Like, it was never gonna be a novella. The tale grew in the telling. But she did not like that first draft. And this is said with all the love in the world for Nava, that she and I made that baby together. But I went to a convention in France, and Christopher Priest was also a guest. And I feel like now the origin story of space opera has to include this, which was always what happened, but I didn't really talk about it that much. But as he's passed, I want to share this. So I was in like a deep crisis about this book, because I really thought I had done a pretty good job, except for the ending, and that was not what I got back on my editorial notes. And he made the mistake of asking what I was working on when we went out to drinks together, because when I introduced myself, he said what many men do, especially older men, when they meet me: "Oh, my girlfriend is a huge fan of your work." I've thought about having t-shirts made, "Your girlfriend's a huge fan of my work." But I burst into tears like a gross American. And he was like, "Whoa!" And I said, like, I don't know who's bad at this. Like, I thought I was doing okay, but like, I don't think she understands what I was trying to do. And I think ultimately what the issue was she thought Eurovision and imagined the ballads, and I thought Eurovision and imagined Toy, which is like a bonkers song with like sung by anime cats, like the comedy goofy ones that like are never gonna win. That's what I thought of, and she thought serious ballad. And we worked it out. But like, he full on like high school football movie, halftime at the championship, like coach talked to me for we spent the next 4 days almost exclusively together when we weren't on a panel. And he absolutely like gave me the mother of all pep talks and like put all the confidence back into me. And I went home and I turned around what everybody's read in 2 weeks, which involved a tremendous amount of heavy lifting to change it. And sometimes Nava was right. It needed to be funny. It wasn't gonna be serious. You can't play that straight in either sense of the word. Mm-hmm. So Christopher Priest was my football coach for that, for that book. And Space Oddity, the sequel, is in part dedicated to him.
That's awesome. I think we're going to open up to questions in a second, but I did want to ask you about, you mentioned like you could talk about what makes Eurovision so special. So 2 years ago, my husband and I were in Scotland, and we were looking for a place to have dinner, and there was a bar that was like, we were walking by, and they're like, "We're doing the Eurovision Song Contest tonight," and I was like, "Babe, we have to go there, and we have to watch this," and he's like, "Why, what is it?" And I was like, "Oh, just wait." And he is obsessed now, like yeah. Tell us why.
Okay.
It's so amazing.
So I'll do it quickly. I'm basically like a terrible evangelist for Eurovision now. Like, have you heard the good news? Eurovision is here to bless and raise us all up. So Eurovision is like a combination of like X Factor or Pop Idol, Miss Universe, and World War I. It started in 1956 as a way to bring the continent back together after they'd spent the first half of the century just tearing each other apart. And I genuinely think that's one of the most beautiful human things. Like, maybe we could sing it out. But it has worked because of a genius rule. Oh, those beautiful rules lawyers. They have such great value in the world, because without this rule, Eurovision wouldn't work. You can't vote for your own country. The judges, because the rules change like Worldcon depending on the host, because you win nothing except hosting it the next year, and that costs a lot of money. There's a professional musician judges jury thing, and then there's a home vote, and neither can vote for their own countries, which is fantastic, but it also means that the scoreboard is a snapshot of the politics in Europe at any given year. So everyone's mad at Russia this year. No one's voting for Russia. Everyone's been mad at England for always. Nil point. No points. It actually turned out that England just wasn't trying, and as soon as they tried, they came in second and then got to host it. But yeah, so it's this incredible tradition, but at the same time, it's the only place where you can see, like, anime cats singing while a woman bucks like a chicken right next to the most devastating ballad you've ever heard, back to back, and then another ballad that's just awful. The costumes are totally over the top sometimes. It changes a lot year to year. And that Buck Chicken one won. It's a totally remarkable thing, and I love it so, so much. It is one of my favorite things humans have ever done, and that is a message that is repeated over and over again in space opera and Space Oddity. Life is beautiful and life is stupid, and so is Eurovision.
Excellent. All right, we've got somebody running around with a microphone, so raise your hand if you've got questions.
I can't see very well at all, so.
Yeah.
I wanted to know what got you into classics enough to aspire to be a professor of it, and what makes writing more exciting than classics for you to not be a professor of it?
That's such a great question. And also, I've never been asked that question, which is why I have a big smile. So this is a good story, actually. I was always obsessed with Greek myth. Anybody read D'Aulaire's Greek myths in here? Yeah, it's a real special book. I used to run a community online called D'Aulaire's Kids. I've always loved Greek mythology, but that does not a profession make. I went to American River College in Sacramento, California, community college. And there was a professor emeritus named Catherynne Holbein, and Catherynne died just 2 months ago. And she was a poetry professor at Sacramento State. And because she was brilliant and amazing and retired and emeritus, they let her do whatever she wanted. And she's like, what I want to do this year is I want to teach a year-long course. First trimester is the Iliad, second trimester is the Odyssey, third trimester is the Aeneid, and that's all we're doing. And I'm teaching it as poetry. I'm not teaching it as history. I'm not doing any of that. It's poetry. And I took that class. Oh, the classes you choose out of a catalog sometimes that change your whole fucking life. Oh my God. So we fell in love with Catherynne Holbein, this little class, and it was not a big class. It never is with classics. And we fell in love. I fell in love with the Iliad and the Odyssey. I loved it so, so much. I'd never read it in that kind of depth. Of course, I read the Odyssey. I don't think I ever actually had read the Iliad yet, but I was also 18, 19. But I remembered, like, the Cyclops. The way she taught it, and she taught us more than that. Like, she taught us about sort of, there is a religion behind the Greek myths. Even the Greeks knew that that was kind of the goofy part for show. Like, there is a numinous religion there, and she taught us about it. It was amazing. And I want to say it was my idea, but I'm not sure it was. It could have just been the whole class. And I don't want to take credit in case it wasn't, because my memory doesn't, I think it was my idea, but it might not have been. Some number of us had an idea. What if we did an all-night reading of the Iliad? Because this is supposed to be oral. This is supposed to be read out loud, and none of us read it out loud. And if you work out the timing, if you started at like 3 in the afternoon, you'd finish the next morning. And so we partnered with the Sacramento Poetry Center, and about 100 people ended up signing up to be part of this thing. And we went out to an empty field in Sacramento with couches that we carried into this empty field. We had a Greek restaurant that went and did like a lamb on a spit for us. Everyone brought food. There were bongo drums. And somehow Catherynne found this man who spoke ancient Greek. And he read the first 15 lines of each book in ancient Greek in dactylic hexameter. I'd never heard anything like it in my whole life. It was so beautiful. And it's like seeing the girl of your dreams. Like, I gotta have her. Like, I gotta have that. I want that. And it was one of the most moving, like, group theatrical poetic experiences I've ever had. I was reading, it was so, my idea was not the logistics, that was Catherynne. You got a number and it corresponded to the order that you would go in. So we all had like these numbers safety pinned to our jeans all the way down so that we'd know who was up next. I was reading Hecuba weeping over her son's body being dragged around the walls of Troy as the sun came up, and just like sobbing. We were all sobbing over poor Hector thousands of years later as though it happened yesterday. And it was so moving and amazing, and I changed my major right then. And I went to San Diego, and I started learning Greek, and the next year we did the Odyssey, and I read the Greek. And she, to her last living year, kept doing it every single year. She's done it in New York, she's done it in Crete, thousands of people have come. This has become a whole huge thing. This is why I say I want to say it was my idea, but I'm not sure. And even if it was my idea, she is the one who like made that the last quarter of her life. And I fell so completely in love with it. But then you can fall in love, but then you have to be married. And things aren't as fun anymore. And when you're learning Greek, when you're in a classics department, particularly in America, when I went over to Scotland, things were a lot better because they teach it very differently. It is incredibly linguistically focused. And at one point in one of my classes, the professor said, or I asked a philosophical question about Plato. And she said, well, the good news is we don't really have to worry about that. We can just move on to the next subject-verb-object chart. And like a part of me died. I was like, no, but I don't want to do that. And I did have great professors. I studied with Paige Dubois, who's like the world authority on Sappho. And another Catherynne, Catherynne Ringrose, who, I'm going to say this word carefully, it's not the operating system, one of the top experts on eunuchs. And I did have many great professors, but that moment just like withered something in me. And I was so burned out by the time I was in Scotland taking a class on just the first book of the Iliad, which is my favorite book of the Iliad. I barely cared, because I was so burned out on the little nitty-gritty technical language bits. And when I graduated, I'd written one short story for an experimental writing class. I'd never really written fiction, I'd written poetry. And I had so much that had been repressed in me just doing that I wrote my first novel in 10 days. Like, I wrote The Labyrinth, which is my first published novel, in 10 days. There was just so much that had been pent up from not being allowed to express myself except through translation. So that's kind of how all that happened. What a great question.
This is not going to be a great question. This is just going to be a silly one. Did you ever have contact with the guy that sparked the idea for space opera again?
Oh, absolutely. Charles Tan's he's kind of not really a smoff, but like near that. He's a very involved fan, and I've never met him. God, I'd love to meet him. But I've spoken to him many times. He's mentioned profusely in the liner notes for both books. And of course, I owe just a great deal to this man. And every once in a while, I email him just like, I just want to say thank you again for like everything. You know? Space opera, Universal bought the rights to a movie like weeks after it came out. And the check arrived 3 weeks after I gave birth. That book is why I could take a year off instead of 3 months. Like that, Charles gave me so much in that. And again, it is a circle of life thing, like the way that fans and authors can interact and creators can interact because of the internet used to be a really nice thing. And like it can be this wonderful relationship. And yeah, I owe so much to Charles Tan.
This is an invitation for a rant of some sort. How angry, conflicted, weirded, potentially delighted are you by Australia being in the Eurovision Song Contest?
I have no issue with it. My only concern was, don't let America in. We'll ruin it, and we won't get it, and we will be very upset at not being able to vote for ourselves. Unless we are willing to send like RuPaul or something, then maybe that would be a signal. But no, we shouldn't be involved. That was my only concern. I was married to an Australian for not when that happened, but shortly after. And it's funny, when I was writing space opera, I did a bunch of extra research on Eurovision beyond my own nerdity. And by the way, oh my God, is that a nerd fandom? It is unreal. Like, there are what you can find every song that's ever been sung, even in a semifinal of Eurovision, and translations of lyrics. It's great. But every time I'd ask the Australian, like, oh, did you know? He's like, I mean, yeah. Of course I do, because Australia loves Eurovision so much. They love it so much, they're kind of over it in some weird ways. Also, Australia did one of my all-time favorite Eurovision entries, which is Zero Gravity by Kate Heideke Miller. And so I don't have a problem with it. I think that their effort is very varying. They really came out of the gate with a bang, and then have not been really holding their end up the last couple of years, as far as my opinion. I don't have a problem with Australia being in it particularly. I think that just shows that sort of love can really make a big difference. They just love it so much that Europe was like, all right, fine. And I have a lot of Canadian friends that are like, hey, we are just as colonized and related to these people. Like, we should get to be in it. Celine Dion won, she's ours. So no, I have no problem with Australia being in it.
Welcome home, Kat.
That's my dad.
About the time you created space opera, you created helped create a new human being.
I did.
How has being a parent impacted your writing and your professional life?
So, in both a good and bad way, I'm really tired. The bad is that I'm exhausted all the time, and I don't have a lot of help. So, like, it is difficult to just jump into being wildly creative for 15 minutes and then mom. But the good thing that has kind of come out of it is that I am too tired to make every word matter anymore. And somehow, that seems to be really working out for me stylistically. The exhaustion has evened out how hard I was just going at everything all the time in a book. And like, the language is still there, but there's just regular language in between it. And I think that has come out with a sort of, you can't call it a hybrid style because it's all just me, but like, from my old style to what I'm writing now, I do think it's actually an improvement, and the exhaustion seems to be working out pretty well for me. My child is also, I think when I found out I was having, gender notwithstanding, a Y chromosome was involved. I don't know, I just kind of figured that like they'd look like my husband or my dad or his dad, and be like, I don't know, I had to like get right with football and monster trucks. And I was totally unprepared for a clone of me. My child looks exactly like me, and every time they're into something, it is something I can absolutely help them out with. They love Eurovision. They asked me the other day, Mama, can we bake cookies and watch a whole Eurovision, not like one song, but from a different year? Can we just watch the whole thing? I was like, yes, Virginia. Yeah, yes, we can. And they, they're really into watching like the old science fiction movies like War of the Worlds and The Invisible Man and all that right now. So I'm rediscovering those, and it is so delightful to have this little child who, and I try not to push them into my stuff. They don't have to like my stuff. I'll do football and monster trucks if that's what it's got to be. I'll get right with that. I wrote a football story, White Lines on a Green Field. I can do it. But it's never been that. It has been like, for example, Part of the reason I bought the house that I live in is that there's built-in bookshelves on almost every wall. So the poetry books are in my bedroom. And a couple of weeks ago, Bastian stopped being interested in the books that I was reading them for bedtime stories and wanted poems from, not Shel Silverstein, they have no interest in that at all, poems from my poetry books. So the first one they wanted was 20th century Russian poetry. I was like, it's all Nazis and gulags, man. It's not pleasant. But like, I found a nice one. And now I hear like, Mom, I'm waiting for my Emily Dickinson. I like literally only wants to hear like real poetry from like a survey class of poetry. And that is so wonderful, and it makes me remember why I liked those things before I got burned out. You know, before those things were sort of monetized and made into a clickable link on your list of interests on the internet, so you could never once feel like you had discovered something. Yeah. And see it through a child's eyes, but like it is kind of, the cliches are cliches because they're true. And when he asked me like how many objects I have that are cursed. Like, there's a story in that, and they're getting to an age where I can ask them if I can use that for a story. I don't know how many of you know that Madeleine L'Engle, she had several children, and they all had something to say about how she often took the stories of their lives for her books. And I mean, as a mother, I get that. Like, you're 4. You're not going to be writing a book. But like, I also understand that that felt terrible to her children, so I didn't want to do that to my kids. So I haven't done a lot of that until kind of now I can be like, I like what you said. Can I borrow that? And so it is wonderful. The big drawback is just time. It's very, very hard to organize time the way I used to. But the exhaustion seems to be paying off. The two things that I wrote, like, in the baby phase, were The Past is Red and Come From Me with Apples, both of which were nominated for everything under the sun and are two of the most successful novellas I've ever had. And like, Come From Me with Apples is the definition of exhaustion. What that book is actually about is how frustrated I was with the gendered expectations that suddenly landed on me like a sack of bricks, that it was all on me.
That is a fantastic book.
Thank you.
Speaking of time, I believe we are out of it, but I did have one final quick question. Eurovision's coming up, right?
Yes.
What are the dates? Do you know?
I think the grand final is on May 17th. Okay. If you're a total nerd, the semifinals are Tuesday and Thursday before the Saturday of the grand final. It's all on Peacock. Thank you, Peacock. Right. Honestly, genuinely, like it used to be so difficult to watch Eurovision from America, and now Peacock airs the whole thing. So yes, enjoy the beauty of Eurovision coming up soon.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.